please, Rick. You're scaring the baby. Charlotte's scream cut through the night as crystal shattered against the imported marble wall of their pristine kitchen. Charlotte Hartwell stood at 7 months pregnant in her million-dollar home, watching her husband's face transform into something she didn't recognize. The argument had started over something so simple: dinner plans. She wanted to stay home with her swollen feet elevated, maybe order takeout and watch a movie. Rick insisted they attend the charity gala downtown, complete with networking and his carefully orchestrated public appearances. But this wasn't really about dinner. This was about control, and Rick's grip had been tightening around her neck like a noose for months now. "Don't be so dramatic, Charlotte," Rick snarled, using her full name like a weapon. He only called her Charlie when he wanted something. "You're carrying my air. Act like it matters." Tumber. The first shove caught her off guard, sending her stumbling backward against the kitchen island. Her hands flew instinctively to her belly, protecting the life growing inside her. At 29, Charlotte had thought she understood what marriage meant, what love looked like. 5 years with Rick had slowly eroded that understanding. "Rick, please," she whispered, feeling their daughter kick frantically inside her. Even the baby seemed to sense the danger. "I can't go out tonight. My back is killing me, and Dr. Stone said I need to rest more." His laugh was cold, calculated. "Dr. Stone works for me, remember? I pay her bills. She'll say whatever keeps my wife healthy enough to produce healthy children." The second shove was harder, more deliberate. Charlotte's hip struck the marble countertop with a sickening crack that seemed to echo through their cavernous kitchen. Pain shot through her side and she gasped, one hand clutching her belly, the other gripping the counter for support. That's when Rick's fingers tangled in her auburn hair and yanked her head back, forcing her to look at him. His grip was tight enough to bring tears to her eyes, tight enough that she could feel individual strands pulling loose from her scalp. Something inside Charlotte snapped. Not fear. That had been her constant companion for months. This was clarity, sharp and sudden as broken glass. Her phone was already in her trembling hand. 911. 3 numbers that would change everything. "This is it," she whispered to her unborn daughter, feeling the strong kicks of protest against her ribs. "This is where it ends." The phone rang once, twice. Rick's expression shifted from rage to confusion as he registered what she was doing. "Charlotte, what the hell?" 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice crackled through the speaker, professional and calm. Rick's grip on her hair tightened, but Charlotte spoke anyway, her voice surprisingly steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. "My husband just assaulted me. I'm 7 months pregnant, and I need help immediately." Rick's face went white, then red, then something worse, calculating. She watched in real time as he switched personas, from the man who just grabbed her by the hair to the charming tech mogul who gave TED Talks about innovation and the future of artificial intelligence. "Charlotte, honey," he said, his voice suddenly gentle, practiced. "You're having pregnancy hormones. You know how emotional you get. Hang up the phone." But Charlotte saw him clearly now. She saw every expensive gift that had come with an apology, every exotic vacation that had followed a misunderstanding, every time he'd convinced her she was being too sensitive, or dramatic, or hormonal. The operator's voice came through again. "Ma'am, are you there? Are you safe right now?" "My address is 4721 Maple Ridge Drive," Charlotte said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Westfield Heights subdivision. I'm in the kitchen. My husband is here with me." Rick began pacing like a caged animal, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. She could see him thinking, calculating, trying to figure out how to minimize the damage to his reputation. "Do you know what you're doing?" he hissed, keeping his voice low enough that the operator might not hear. "You're destroying everything we built together. Think about the baby's future, Charlotte. Think about what kind of life you can give her without me." Charlotte looked around at their designer furniture, the imported marble, the professional photographs of their perfect life that decorated every surface. The house that had slowly transformed from dream home to prison without her even noticing. "I am thinking about her future," she said, her free hand pressed protectively against her belly. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Rick stopped pacing, his face cycling through emotions. Panic, rage, calculation, and finally that practiced charm again. "Ma'am, officers are en route," the operator said. "Stay on the line with me until they arrive. Are you injured?" Charlotte touched her scalp where Rick had grabbed her hair. It was tender, sore, but not bleeding. "He pulled my hair. Hard. There might be bruising." "And you're pregnant?" "7 months. The baby's been kicking frantically since it started." Rick was staring at her now, his expression unreadable. "5 years," he said softly. "5 years of giving you everything. This house, that car, those clothes, that jewelry. Everything you're wearing, I bought for you. Everything you are, I made you." The sirens were getting louder now, closer. Red and blue lights began to flash through their floor-to-ceiling windows, painting the white walls in alternating colors. Charlotte walked toward the front door, phone still pressed to her ear, Rick trailing behind her like a shadow. "Ma'am, are the officers outside now?" "Yes," Charlotte said, and without hesitation, she opened the front door before they even knocked. 2 police officers stood on her doorstep, one older woman with kind eyes and graying hair, one younger man who looked barely old enough to be out of training. The woman stepped forward. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Detective Maria Santos. We received a domestic violence call from this address." "That was me," Charlotte said, and the words felt like jumping off a cliff. "I called you." Rick appeared beside her, suddenly the picture of concern. His expensive suit was perfectly pressed, his hair styled just so, his expression worried but controlled. "Officers, I'm Rick Hartwell," he said, extending his hand in that practiced gesture she'd seen him use 1,000 times in business meetings. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My wife is 7 months pregnant, and her emotions have been quite volatile lately. You know how it is." Detective Santos didn't take his outstretched hand. Instead, she looked directly at Charlotte. "Ma'am, we need to speak with you privately. Is there somewhere we can talk?" Charlotte nodded, stepping aside to let the officers enter their home. As she led them toward the living room, she caught sight of herself in the hallway mirror, pale, shaken, her hair disheveled where Rick had grabbed it, but her eyes clear and determined. For the first time in months, she recognized the woman looking back at her. Detective Maria Santos had responded to domestic violence calls for 15 years. She'd seen it all, the bruises, the excuses, the careful choreography of abuse that played out in living rooms just like this one. But something about Charlotte Hartwell struck her immediately. Most victims were either hysterical or completely shut down, dissociated from their trauma. Charlotte was neither. She sat on the edge of the Italian leather sofa, her hands cradling her pregnant belly, and her voice was steady as she recounted the evening's events. "The argument started around 8:30, Charlotte said, glancing at the grandfather clock in the corner. "Rick wanted me to attend a charity gala with him tonight. I told him I was too tired, that my back was hurting and I needed a rest." Officer Tom Bradley, the younger policeman, took notes while Detective Santos listened. Rick paced near the windows, his phone buzzing constantly with what Charlotte assumed were concerned messages from friends and business associates who'd heard the sirens. "Mrs. Hartwell," Detective Santos said gently, "you mentioned on the phone that your husband assaulted you. Can you describe exactly what happened?" Charlotte took a deep breath, feeling her daughter's strong kicks against her ribs. "He shoved me. Twice. The first time caught me off guard. I stumbled backward and had to catch myself on the kitchen island. The second time was harder. I hit the counter with my hip." She lifted her shirt slightly, revealing a dark bruise already forming along her hip bone. Detective Santos photographed it with a professional camera, while Officer Bradley continued writing. "After the second shove, he grabbed my hair," Charlotte continued, unconsciously touching her scalp. "He pulled my head back and held it there while he talked to me. That's when I called 911. Rick stopped pacing. "Detective, I need to correct something here. Charlotte has been under tremendous stress with the pregnancy. Her hormones are affecting her judgment. I never assaulted anyone. I was trying to calm her down." Detective Santos had heard variations of this speech hundreds of times. She turned to Rick with the patient expression of someone who'd mastered the art of letting people reveal themselves. "Mr. Hartwell, where exactly were you when Mrs. Hartwell made the emergency call?" "I was right there with her, obviously, trying to convince her to hang up and discuss this rationally." "And you didn't attempt to stop her from calling?" Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "I told her she was overreacting. that calling the police was unnecessary. Detective Santos nodded and made a note. Then she turned back to Charlotte. Mrs. Hartwell, has anything like this happened before? Charlotte hesitated. This was the moment she'd been dreading. Once she said the words out loud, there would be no taking them back, no pretending everything was fine. Not exactly like this, she said slowly, but Rick has ways of controlling situations. Controlling me. Such as? Charlotte looked at Rick, who was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. He monitors my phone calls. He's installed tracking apps, so he always knows where I am. He controls all our finances. I don't have access to our bank accounts or credit cards without his approval. That's called being responsible with money, Rick interjected. Charlotte has never been good with financial planning. I handle our investments, our accounts, our financial future. When did this financial arrangement begin? Detective Santos asked. About 2 years ago, Charlotte admitted. Rick said it would be simpler if he managed everything. He said I could focus on other things. Like what? Charlotte realized she couldn't answer that question. What had she been focusing on for the past 2 years? Decorating their house according to Rick's specifications? Attending social events where she smiled and nodded while he networked? Trying to get pregnant because Rick wanted an heir? I used to work, she said suddenly. I was a marketing executive at Davidson Communications. I was good at my job. When did you stop working? 3 years ago. Rick said it would be better for our relationship if I didn't have the stress of a career. He said he made enough money for both of us. Detective Santos photographed the bruise on Charlotte's scalp where Rick had grabbed her hair, then examined the kitchen where the initial altercation had taken place. She noted the fresh dent in the marble wall where something had struck it, the scattered pieces of what looked like an expensive crystal glass. Mr. Hartwell, she said, returning to the living room, how do you explain the damage in the kitchen? Rick's composure slipped for just a moment. Charlotte threw a glass. She was hysterical. Actually, Charlotte said quietly, you threw it. At the wall behind me. Mrs. Hartwell, I need to ask you a difficult question, Detective Santos said, sitting down across from her. Do you feel safe staying in this house tonight? Charlotte looked around at their multi-million-dollar home, the designer furniture Rick had chosen, the art collection he'd curated, the life he'd built around them, both like an elaborate cage. She thought about sleeping in the same bed with a man who'd grabbed her hair and shoved her while she was carrying his child. No, she said simply. I don't. Rick's phone rang, and he glanced at it with obvious frustration. This is ridiculous. Officers, my wife is clearly having some kind of pregnancy-related emotional episode. She's been seeing a therapist for anxiety, Dr. Rebecca Martinez downtown. You can call her tomorrow and confirm that Charlotte has been struggling with irrational fears. I've been struggling with fears that are apparently rational, Charlotte said, her voice growing stronger. Fears that my husband might hurt me. Detective Santos stood up. Mr. Hartwell, based on Mrs. Hartwell's statement and the physical evidence we've observed, I'm placing you under arrest for domestic violence. The room went silent except for the grandfather clock ticking in the corner. Rick's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and finally, cold calculation. Detective, you're making a serious mistake, he said as Officer Bradley approached with handcuffs. I'm Rick Hartwell. I employ over 300 people in this city. I sit on the hospital board, the Arts Council, and the Mayor's Economic Development Committee. One phone call from my attorney will have you investigating parking violations by morning. Detective Santos had heard this speech before too. Mr. Hartwell, you have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights were read, Charlotte watched her husband's carefully constructed facade finally crack completely. His charm evaporated, replaced by raw fury. You'll never survive without me, Charlotte, he snarled as the handcuffs clicked into place. You have nothing. You are nothing. You're a college dropout who couldn't even keep a job at a second-rate marketing firm. Without my money, without my connections, you're nobody. The words hit her like physical blows, designed with surgical precision to destroy what remained of her confidence. For a moment, Charlotte felt the familiar wave of self-doubt, the voice in her head that whispered, maybe he was right. Maybe she was making a terrible mistake. But then her daughter kicked hard against her ribs, as if reminding her why they were fighting this battle. Charlotte stood up from the sofa, all 5 feet and 6 inches of her, and looked directly into Rick's eyes. "Then I guess I'll find out who I really am," she said. The police station at midnight felt like another planet. Charlotte sat in an interview room that smelled of disinfectant and stale coffee, her hands wrapped around a foam cup of lukewarm tea that someone had brought her. Through the small window in the door, she could see officers moving back and forth in the hallway, their voices a low murmur of official business. Detective Santos returned with a thick folder of paperwork and settled across from her at the metal table. The fluorescent lights were harsh, unforgiving, but somehow Charlotte felt more clear-headed than she had in months. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need you to understand something," Detective Santos began. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen hundreds of domestic violence cases, and most women in your situation take weeks, sometimes months, to decide whether to press charges. You made the call while it was happening." Charlotte shifted in the uncomfortable chair, trying to find a position that didn't put pressure on her bruised hip. "I guess I finally stopped making excuses for him." "Tell me about that. The excuses." Charlotte closed her eyes, thinking back over the past few years. When had it started? When had Rick's concern become control, his protection become possession? "It was gradual," she said slowly. "At first I thought it was sweet that he wanted to know where I was all the time. He said he worried about me, that he loved me so much he couldn't stand the thought of anything happening to me. When did that change? The tracking apps appeared on my phone about 18 months ago. Rick said it was for safety. What if I had a car accident and couldn't call for help? The apps would let him find me immediately." Detective Santos nodded, writing notes. "What about your job? You mentioned you used to work in marketing." "I was good at it," Charlotte said, and she could hear the surprise in her own voice. "I'd forgotten how good I was. I managed accounts worth millions of dollars. I supervised a team of 12 people. I won awards. What made you quit?" Charlotte touched her belly, feeling her daughter's restless movements. "Rick said the stress wasn't good for our relationship. He said I was always tired, always distracted by work problems. He said if I really loved him, I'd want to focus on building our life together." "And your friends? Your coworkers?" Charlotte's throat tightened. "They stopped calling after a while. Rick would always have something planned when they invited me out. Or he'd suggest we invite them over instead, and then monopolize the conversation talking about his business deals. Eventually, the invitations stopped coming." Detective Santos leaned forward. "Charlotte, that's called isolation. It's one of the classic patterns of abuse. The abuser gradually separates the victim from their support system." "But he never hit me before tonight," Charlotte protested. "He never even raised his voice, really. He just managed things. Managed me." Physical violence is usually the last escalation, not the first sign. What you're describing, the financial control, the surveillance, the isolation from friends and family, those are all forms of abuse. Charlotte stared at the foam cup in her hands. "My mother warned me 2 years ago at Christmas dinner. She pulled me aside and said Rick seemed too controlling, that she was worried about me. I was so angry with her. I told her she was jealous of our success, our happiness. And when was the last time you spoke to your mother?" "Christmas last year. Rick said her negativity was bad for the baby, that we needed to surround ourselves with positive energy during the pregnancy." Detective Santos handed Charlotte a tissue as tears began to slide down her cheeks. "I haven't talked to my own mother in 8 months, Charlotte whispered. "She's going to be a grandmother, and I haven't even sent her a picture from my ultrasounds." The door opened, and Officer Bradley stuck his head in. "Detective, Mrs. Hartwell's attorney is here." Charlotte looked up, confused. "My attorney? But I haven't called anyone." A moment later, a tall woman in her 50s entered the room, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of determined professionalism despite the late hour. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Sarah Chen, an attorney with Women's Legal Advocacy. Detective Santos called me. I represent victims of domestic violence pro bono." Charlotte shook her head. "I can't afford an attorney. Rick controls all our money." "That's exactly why I'm here," Sarah said, settling into a chair. "Charlotte, may I call you Charlotte? You don't need Rick's money to get legal representation. There are resources available to help women in your situation." Detective Santos slid a stack of papers across the table. "Charlotte, these are the forms to file a protective order against Rick. It will legally require him to stay away from you and have no contact with you while the case is pending. Charlotte stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. What does that mean exactly? It means he can't come to wherever you're staying, Sarah explained. He can't call you, text you, email you, or contact you through third parties. He can't come to your workplace or anywhere else you regularly go. But I don't have a workplace. I don't have anywhere to go. Sarah opened her briefcase and pulled out a card. There's a women's shelter downtown that has a special program for pregnant women. Clean, safe, and completely confidential. Rick would have no way of finding you there. The thought of a women's shelter filled Charlotte with a mixture of relief and terror. Relief that such a place existed. Terror that she actually needed it. Detective Santos, she said slowly, what happens to Rick now? He's been booked on domestic violence charges. He'll see a judge in the morning for arraignment. If he posts bail, he'll be released with conditions, most likely including a no-contact order with you. Charlotte's hands trembled as she signed the protective order paperwork. Each signature felt like she was erasing the life she thought she'd known, the future she'd imagined. Mrs. Hartwell, Detective Santos said gently, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Is there any possibility that Rick has been violent with other women in the past? Charlotte froze, her pen hovering over the signature line. I don't know. Why do you ask? Men like Rick don't usually start with grabbing someone by the hair. There's usually a progression, a history, sometimes in previous relationships. Charlotte thought about Rick's ex-girlfriend, Monica, whom she'd met briefly at a company party years ago. Monica had seemed nervous around Rick, almost afraid. At the time, Charlotte had assumed it was just awkwardness from seeing an ex-boyfriend with his new girlfriend. There was a woman named Monica Stevens, she said slowly. They dated for about 2 years before he met me. When I met her, she seemed scared of him, maybe, but I thought it was just weird to see her ex with someone new. Detective Santos and Sarah exchanged a look. Charlotte, Sarah said, would you be willing to help us try to contact Monica? If Rick has a pattern of abuse, it could significantly strengthen your case. Charlotte nodded, then stopped. But what if she doesn't want to get involved? What if she's moved on and doesn't want to revisit that part of her life? That's her choice to make, Detective Santos said. But she might be grateful that someone is finally holding Rick accountable. As Charlotte finished signing the paperwork, her phone buzzed with a text message. Then another, all from numbers she didn't recognize. Friends and business associates of Rick's, Sarah said, glancing at the messages. This is also typical. The abuser's social circle will often pressure the victim to drop charges, to work things out, to think about his reputation and career. Charlotte read one of the messages. Charlotte, this is David Morrison from the Country Club. I hope you'll reconsider this rash decision. Rick is a pillar of our community. Surely whatever happened can be worked out privately. Another. Charlie, it's Susan from Rick's office. Everyone here is shocked by tonight's news. Rick speaks so lovingly about you and the baby. Are you sure you understood his intentions correctly? Charlotte powered off her phone and looked at Detective Santos. How do I make this stop? You don't respond to any of them. You don't defend yourself or explain your decision. Sarah will handle any communication that needs to happen. Sarah stood up and handed Charlotte a business card. Charlotte, I need you to understand something. This is going to be difficult. Rick will use every resource at his disposal to discredit you, to make you seem unstable or vindictive. But you're not alone in this fight. Detective Santos gathered up the signed paperwork. Mrs. Hartwell, do you have somewhere safe to stay tonight? Charlotte looked around the sterile interview room, then down at her 7 months pregnant belly. 24 hours ago, she'd been in her designer kitchen, arguing about dinner plans. Now she was homeless, essentially penniless, and completely dependent on the kindness of strangers. The women's shelter, she said quietly. I can drive you there, Detective Santos offered. It's a good place, Charlotte. You and your baby will be safe there. As they gathered their things to leave, Charlotte caught sight of herself in the reflective surface of the interview room window. Her hair was still mussed from where Rick had grabbed it. Her expensive clothes looked rumpled and out of place, but her eyes were clear. Detective, she said as they walked toward the parking lot, I have one more question. What's that? Do you think I'm doing the right thing? Detective Santos stopped walking and turned to face her. Charlotte, in 15 years of doing this job, I've never seen a woman call 911 while the assault was happening. Most women take months to work up the courage to make that call. You protected yourself and your baby in the moment when it mattered most. I think you're the strongest woman I've met all year. As they drove through the empty streets toward the women's shelter, Charlotte realized that for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. She was terrified, yes, but not afraid. There was a difference, and that difference felt like freedom. The women's shelter looked like an ordinary apartment complex from the outside. Beige brick, small balconies, a playground visible in the courtyard. Charlotte had driven past similar buildings hundreds of times without ever imagining she might need their services. Inside, the common room was painted in soft colors and furnished with comfortable couches that had clearly been chosen for durability rather than style. A few women sat watching late-night television, their children sleeping on blankets nearby. They looked up as Charlotte entered with Detective Santos, offering small nods of understanding rather than curiosity. "Mrs. Hartwell, I'm Janet Rodriguez, the night supervisor," said a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and graying temples. "Detective Santos called ahead. We have a room ready for you." Charlotte's room was small but clean. A single bed, a dresser, a chair by the window. The bathroom was down the hall, shared with 3 other women. After months in Rick's mansion, with its marble bathrooms and walk-in closets, the simplicity felt strange, but not unwelcome. "I don't have anything with me," Charlotte realized aloud. "No clothes, no toiletries, nothing." "We have emergency supplies," Janet assured her. "Tomorrow, if you'd like, one of our advocates can help you arrange to get some of your belongings from your house. But for tonight, we'll make sure you have everything you need." Detective Santos handed Charlotte her business card. "Call me if you need anything, or if you remember anything else that might be important for the case." "And Charlotte?" "Yes? Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be a big day." After Detective Santos left, Charlotte sat on the narrow bed staring at the blank walls. Outside her window, she could hear traffic from the highway and the distant sound of someone's television. It was so different from the tomb-like silence of Rick's house, where the only sounds were the hum of expensive appliances and the grandfather clock marking time. Her daughter kicked hard against her ribs, making Charlotte gasp. "I know, sweetheart," she whispered, rubbing her belly. "Everything's different now, but we're safe. That's what matters." Janet knocked softly on the doorframe. "Charlotte, I brought you some things." She carried a small bag with basic toiletries, a comfortable nightgown, and a package of crackers. "The crackers are for morning sickness," Janet explained, "though at 7 months you might be past that." "Thank you." Charlotte accepted the bag gratefully. "Janet, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "How many women come here because of their husbands?" Janet sat in the chair by the window. "About 60% of our residents are leaving marriages or long-term relationships. The other 40% are usually leaving boyfriends or occasionally family situations." "Do they? Do most of them go back?" Janet's expression was gentle but honest. "Some do. Leaving an abusive relationship is complicated, especially when there are children involved, when the woman has been financially dependent, when there are threats about custody or immigration status. But Charlotte, every woman who walks through our doors is stronger than she thinks she is." "I don't feel strong. I feel terrified." "That's normal. You've just made one of the most difficult decisions a person can make. It's natural to feel scared." Charlotte looked out the window at the city lights spreading into the distance. Somewhere out there, Rick was probably in a jail cell, furious and planning his next move. Somewhere else, their house sat empty, full of expensive things that suddenly seemed meaningless. "Janet, what happens now? I mean, practically speaking, I don't have any money, any credit cards, any way to support myself and the baby. Tomorrow you'll meet with one of our social services advocates. She'll help you apply for emergency assistance, medical coverage for your pregnancy, and housing assistance for after the baby's born. There are resources available, Charlotte. You won't fall through the cracks." After Janet left, Charlotte changed into the provided nightgown and lay down on the narrow bed. The mattress was firm, nothing like the luxury pillow top she'd grown accustomed to, but it felt safe in a way Rick's bed never had. Her phone, which she turned back on briefly, showed 37 missed calls and over 200 text messages. Friends of Rick's, business associates, people from their social circle, all wanting to know what was happening, all subtly or not so subtly, suggesting she reconsider her actions. One message stood out from the others. It was from Hannah Walsh, her former best friend and co-worker from Davidson Communications. "Charlie, I saw the news. If you need anything, anything at all, call me. I've been worried about you for so long. You're braver than you know." Charlotte stared at the message, remembering how close she and Hannah had been before Rick gradually convinced her that her work friendships were shallow and competitive. Hannah had tried to maintain contact, but Charlotte had slowly let the friendship fade, believing Rick's subtle suggestions that Hannah was jealous of their happiness. Another message caught her attention, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Dr. Rebecca Stone's office. We saw the police report mentioned you're pregnant. If you need medical care or have any concerns about your pregnancy after tonight's incident, please call us immediately, day or night." Charlotte realized she hadn't even thought about how the stress and trauma might affect the baby. She pressed her hands against her belly, feeling for movement. Her daughter obliged with a strong kick that was somehow reassuring. The door opened quietly, and a young woman about Charlotte's age peered in. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman whispered. "I'm Maria. I'm in the room next door. I heard you come in tonight and wanted to check if you needed anything." "I'm okay, thank you. I'm Charlotte." Maria stepped into the room. She was petite with dark hair and intelligent eyes that held a wariness Charlotte recognized. "First night?" Charlotte nodded. "It's the hardest night," Maria said. "After that, it gets easier. Not easy, but easier." "How long have you been here?" 3 weeks. I left my boyfriend after he broke my wrist. He said it was an accident, that he was just trying to grab my arm to stop me from leaving during an argument." Maria held up her hand, which was still in a light cast. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry, be proud. You made the call while it was happening. That takes incredible courage." Charlotte hadn't thought of it as courage. It had felt like desperation, like the instinctive reaction of a mother protecting her child. "Maria, can I ask you something? Do you ever wonder if you made the right choice?" Maria sat on the edge of the bed. "Every day. But then I remember that the last thing he said to me before I left was that next time, he'd make sure I couldn't call for help. The violence doesn't get better, Charlotte. It only gets worse." They talked for another hour, sharing stories and fears, and hopes for the future. Maria was a teacher who'd been on administrative leave since the incident, but she'd been promised her job back when she was ready to return. She had family in California who were helping with legal fees. "The advocates here are amazing," Maria said as she prepared to return to her room. "They helped me understand that what happened wasn't my fault and that I deserve better. They'll help you too." After Maria left, Charlotte lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the shelter settling around her. Women's voices murmuring in other rooms, children coughing, the elevator dinging as the night supervisor made her rounds. She thought about Rick, probably lying awake in his jail cell, plotting his legal strategy. She thought about their house, empty and cold, all those expensive things waiting in the darkness. She thought about the life they'd planned together. The baby showers that wouldn't happen now, the nursery they decorated in soft yellows and greens, the future that had seemed so certain just 24 hours ago. But more than anything, she thought about the moment she dialed 911, the moment she'd chosen her daughter's safety over everything else. That moment had changed everything, had revealed a strength she didn't know she possessed. Her phone buzzed with one final message of the night. This one was from her mother. "Charlotte, I don't know what's happening, but whatever it is, I love you and I'm here if you need me. Call me when you're ready. Mom." Charlotte closed her eyes and felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Not tears of sadness or fear, but tears of relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't alone. Charlotte woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the sound of children playing in the courtyard below. For a moment, she forgot where she was, expecting to see Rick's modern bedroom with its wall of windows overlooking their perfectly manicured lawn. Instead, she saw beige walls and a small dresser, and reality came flooding back. Her first thought was of the baby. She placed her hands on her belly and waited, holding her breath until she felt the familiar flutter of movement that meant her daughter was okay. A soft knock on the door interrupted her morning assessment. "Charlotte, it's Janet. Are you awake? Come in." Janet entered with a cup of tea and a concerned expression. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I expected," Charlotte admitted, accepting the tea gratefully. "What time is it?" "Just after 9. You missed breakfast in the dining room, but I saved you some pastries and fruit. There's someone here to see you. Sarah Chen, your attorney." Charlotte's stomach clenched. She'd hoped for at least one peaceful morning before diving back into the legal complications of her situation. "Is everything okay?" "She has some updates about Rick's arraignment this morning. She's waiting in the conference room whenever you're ready." Charlotte dressed quickly in the clothes Janet had provided, simple jeans and a soft sweater that stretched over her belly. Looking in the small mirror above the dresser, she barely recognized herself without makeup or her usual careful styling. But she looked real, more real than she had in months. Sarah was waiting in the conference room with coffee and a stack of papers. She looked up as Charlotte entered, her expression serious but not grim. "Good morning, Charlotte. How are you feeling?" "Overwhelmed," Charlotte said honestly, settling into a chair. "But okay. I have news from Rick's arraignment. He's been released on bail with a no-contact order that mirrors your protective order. He's legally required to stay at least 500 feet away from you at all times." Charlotte felt a chill despite the warm tea. "So he's free?" "For now." His attorney immediately started making noise about your mental state, about pregnancy hormones affecting your judgment, standard defense tactics in domestic violence cases. "What kind of noise?" Sarah consulted her notes. "They're claiming you've been receiving psychiatric treatment for anxiety and depression, that you have a history of irrational behavior, that Rick was simply trying to calm you down when you became hysterical." Charlotte's face burned. She had been seeing Dr. Martinez for anxiety, but only because Rick had convinced her that her growing unease in their marriage was a personal failing she needed to fix. "Charlotte, I need to ask you about Dr. Martinez. What kind of treatment have you been receiving?" "Talk therapy, mostly. Rick suggested I see her about 6 months ago. He said I seemed anxious all the time, that it wasn't healthy for the baby." "What did you discuss in your sessions?" Charlotte thought back to her appointments with Dr. Martinez. "I talked about feeling isolated, about missing my job, about feeling like I'd lost myself somehow. Dr. Martinez kept asking about my support system, about my relationship with Rick." "What did she conclude?" "She said my anxiety seemed situational rather than clinical. She recommended I reconnect with old friends, maybe consider going back to work part-time after the baby was born. When I told Rick about her suggestions, he said she didn't understand our situation, that she was trying to undermine our marriage." Sarah made notes as Charlotte spoke. "Did Dr. Martinez ever suggest that your anxiety might be related to your relationship with Rick?" "Not directly, but she asked a lot of questions about how I felt when Rick was around versus when he wasn't. She asked about my decision-making process, whether I felt free to make choices about my daily life. Charlotte, would you be willing to sign a release allowing me to speak with Dr. Martinez? Her assessment could actually support our case rather than Rick's defense." "You think so?" "A therapist who can testify that your anxiety was situational and related to your home environment would contradict Rick's claim that you have ongoing mental health issues that affect your judgment." Charlotte signed the release, then Sarah moved on to more practical matters. "We need to discuss your immediate needs: housing, income, medical care. The shelter is temporary. Most residents stay 30 to 60 days while they get back on their feet. I don't have anywhere to go after that. Rick owns our house outright, and I haven't worked in 3 years. I don't even have a current resume." "Let's tackle these one at a time. First, housing. There are several transitional housing programs for pregnant women and new mothers. They provide furnished apartments for up to 18 months while you establish independence." "What about income?" "You're eligible for emergency assistance while the divorce is pending. It's not much, but it will cover basic needs. More importantly, we need to discuss a spousal support and property division." Sarah pulled out a thick document. "This is the prenuptial agreement you signed before your marriage. Have you ever read through it carefully?" Charlotte shook her head. "Rick's lawyer explained it to me before our wedding. He said it was standard, just protecting both of our assets in case of divorce." Charlotte, this prenup is extremely one-sided. According to this document, you would leave the marriage with almost nothing. No claim to the house, the cars, the investment accounts, or Rick's business interests. Charlotte felt sick. So I really would have nothing. Not necessarily. Prenuptial agreements can be challenged in court, especially when there's evidence of duress, lack of independent legal counsel, or domestic violence. The fact that Rick isolated you financially and then became physically abusive could void significant portions of this agreement. Sarah leaned forward. Charlotte, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Are you prepared for Rick to fight dirty? Because that's what's going to happen. What do you mean? He's already started. The mental health angle is just the beginning. He'll likely claim you're an unfit mother, that you're unstable and vindictive. He'll try to turn your friends and social circle against you. He'll use every resource at his disposal to discredit you and minimize his financial obligations. Charlotte thought about the dozens of messages on her phone, the pressure from Rick's friends and business associates. He's already started that too. Good. That means you know what to expect. The key is not to engage. Don't respond to calls or messages from anyone in Rick's circle. Don't try to defend yourself or explain your side of the story. Let me handle all communication. There was another knock on the conference room door, and Janet peered in. Charlotte, your mother is here. Charlotte's breath caught. My mother? Here? Grace Whitmore? She says she drove all night from Cincinnati. Charlotte looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Family support is crucial in cases like this. If your mother is willing to help, that's a significant advantage. A moment later, Grace Whitmore hurried into the conference room, her graying hair pulled back in a hasty ponytail, her clothes wrinkled from the long drive. She looked older than Charlotte remembered, more fragile, but her eyes were bright with determination. Charlie, she said, and Charlotte burst into tears. Grace crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her daughter in a fierce hug, careful of her pregnant belly. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I wasn't there when you needed me. Mom, I was horrible to you. I chose Rick over family. I believed him when he said you were jealous of our happiness. Hush, Grace said, stroking Charlotte's hair. That's what abusers do. They isolate their victims from anyone who might help them see clearly. I never stopped loving you, and I never stopped hoping you'd realize you deserve better. Sarah discreetly left them alone for their reunion. Mother and daughter held each other and cried for the relationship they'd lost, and the grandchild Grace had never been allowed to celebrate. Mom, Charlotte finally said, pulling back to look at her mother's face. I'm having a daughter, your granddaughter. She's due in 2 months. Grace's face lit up despite her tears. A granddaughter. Charlie, she's going to be beautiful and strong, just like her mother. I don't feel strong. I feel like I've made a mess of everything. Grace took Charlotte's hands in hers. Leaving Rick was the strongest thing you've ever done. It took courage I'm not sure I would have had at your age. What am I going to do, Mom? I don't have any money, any job skills that are still relevant, any idea how to be a single mother. You're going to take it one day at a time, Grace said firmly, and you're not going to be alone. I may not have much money to offer, but I have time, and I have love, and I have 40 years of experience raising a daughter who turned out pretty wonderful despite her temporary lapse in judgment about men. Charlotte laughed despite her tears. I missed you so much. I missed you too. Now tell me everything. I want to know about my granddaughter, about your plans, about how I can help. As Charlotte filled her mother in on the past 24 hours, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: unconditional support. Grace didn't judge or lecture or say, I told you so. She just listened and offered practical help and reminded Charlotte that she was loved. By the time Sarah returned to the conference room, Charlotte felt steadier, more grounded. She had her mother back, her daughter kicking strongly inside her, and a team of advocates fighting on her behalf. Rick had money and connections and a carefully constructed public image, but Charlotte had something he'd tried to destroy and failed. People who loved her unconditionally and a strength she was only beginning to discover. Jake Morrison's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a renovated brick building downtown, with tall windows overlooking the courthouse square. Charlotte sat across from him 3 days after leaving Rick, Grace holding her hand as they navigated the brutal mathematics of divorce. Jake was younger than Charlotte had expected, maybe 40, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and the slightly rumpled appearance of someone who cared more about winning cases than impressing clients. Sarah Chen had recommended him as one of the best family law attorneys in the state, especially for high-asset divorces involving domestic violence. Mrs. Hartwell, Jake began, spreading documents across his mahogany desk. I've reviewed your case file and the prenuptial agreement. I'm going to be direct with you. Rick is going to fight dirty. Charlotte had heard this warning from everyone now, but it still made her stomach clench. What exactly does that mean? It means he'll use every resource at his disposal to paint you as an unstable, vindictive woman who's trying to destroy a successful man's life and reputation. He'll claim you're having a mental breakdown, that you're an unfit mother, that you're motivated by greed rather than safety concerns. Jake pulled out a thick manila folder. He's already started. His legal team filed motions yesterday requesting psychological evaluations for both you and the baby after she's born. They're also requesting a restraining order preventing you from speaking to the media about your relationship. Can they do that? They can file whatever they want. Whether a judge will grant it is another matter entirely. But Charlotte, you need to understand, Rick has significantly more resources than we do. His legal team probably costs more per month than most people make in a year. Grace squeezed Charlotte's hand. Are you saying we can't win? Jake's expression grew determined. I'm saying we need to be strategic. Fortunately, Rick's arrest and the physical evidence work strongly in our favor. And Charlotte, the prenuptial agreement might not be as ironclad as Rick thinks. He opened the prenup to a page marked with sticky notes. This agreement was negotiated by Rick's attorney with no independent legal counsel for Charlotte. She signed it 2 weeks before their wedding, under circumstances that could be considered duress. I remember feeling like I had no choice, Charlotte said. Rick's lawyer presented it as standard protection for both of us. But when I asked questions, he kept saying we needed to finalize everything quickly for the wedding timeline. Jake made notes. More importantly, prenuptial agreements can be voided when there's evidence of domestic violence. If we can establish a pattern of abuse, financial, emotional, and physical, we can argue that the entire agreement was signed under coercion. Charlotte felt a flicker of hope. What would that mean? It would mean you'd be entitled to equitable distribution of marital assets. Rick's net worth is approximately $12 million. Half of that would provide significant security for you and your daughter. The number made Charlotte dizzy. She'd lived with Rick's wealth for years, but had never really understood its scope. $6 million? Potentially. But Charlotte, fighting for that level of assets means a prolonged court battle. Rick will make it as ugly in public as possible. Are you prepared for that? Charlotte looked at her mother, then down at her belly where her daughter was currently practicing what felt like karate moves against her ribs. What's the alternative? Rick's current settlement offer. Jake slid another document across the desk. He's willing to provide $50,000 in cash, continuation of your health insurance through the birth, and a monthly payment of $2,000 in child support. $2,000 a month from a millionaire? Grace asked incredulously. It's actually below the state guidelines for child support based on his income, Jake confirmed. He's banking on Charlotte being too scared or too financially desperate to fight for more. Charlotte studied the settlement offer, thinking about the tracker apps on her phone, the canceled credit cards, the gradual isolation from everyone who cared about her. Rick was still trying to control her, even from a distance. What about custody? She asked. Jake's expression grew serious. That's where it gets complicated. Rick is requesting 50-50 custody once the baby is born. His lawyers are arguing that despite the domestic violence incident, he poses no threat to the child. But he grabbed me while I was pregnant. That was threatening the baby too. We'll make that argument. But Charlotte, family courts generally favor both parents having access to their children unless there's direct evidence of abuse toward the child specifically. The thought of handing her newborn daughter over to Rick for half of every week made Charlotte feel physically ill. There has to be another way. Jake leaned forward. There might be. If we can establish a pattern of abuse, not just the single incident that led to his arrest, we can argue for supervised visitation only. But that requires evidence. What kind of evidence? Other victims who are willing to testify. documentation of controlling behavior, medical records showing the impact of stress on your pregnancy, witnesses to his behavior patterns. Charlotte thought about Rick's ex-girlfriend Monica, about Dr. Martinez's notes about her situational anxiety, about Hannah and her other former friends who'd witnessed Rick's gradual takeover of her life. Detective Santos mentioned trying to contact Rick's ex-girlfriend Monica. Do you think she'd be willing to testify? If we can find her, and if she's willing to revisit what might be a traumatic period of her life. That's a lot of ifs. Grace spoke up. What about Charlotte's former co-workers? Surely they noticed changes in her behavior after she married Rick. Jake nodded. That's actually a good angle. We can subpoena employment records, performance reviews, testimony from supervisors and colleagues about Charlotte's competence and stability before Rick's control escalated. Charlotte felt overwhelmed by the complexity of building a legal case around the gradual erosion of her autonomy. Jake, how long will all this take? If we settle quickly, we could have everything finalized before the baby's born. If we fight for equitable distribution and restricted custody, we're looking at 6 to 12 months of litigation. And if we lose? Jake was quiet for a moment. If we lose, you get what Rick's offering now. Minimal assets and 50-50 custody. But Charlotte, I need you to know something. I've been practicing family law for 15 years, and I've never seen a more clear-cut case of financial and emotional abuse. The fact that it escalated to physical violence while you were pregnant gives us significant leverage. Charlotte closed her eyes, feeling her daughter's movements inside her. In 2 months, she'd be born into this complicated world of legal battles and custody arrangements and financial negotiations. She deserved better than that. I want to fight, Charlotte said quietly. Not for the money. Well, not just for the money, for the principle. Rick spent years convincing me I was nothing without him. If I take his settlement offer, I'm proving him right. Grace smiled. That's my daughter talking. Jake gathered the documents. All right then, we fight. But Charlotte, I need you to prepare yourself for what's coming. Rick's team will investigate every aspect of your life. They'll interview anyone who's ever known you, looking for evidence that you're unstable or vindictive. They'll make this personal in ways that might be very painful. More painful than living with Rick? Point taken. Let's get to work. Over the next 2 hours, Jake outlined their strategy. They would request financial records going back 5 years to establish Rick's assets and income. They would subpoena Rick's medical records to look for any history of violence or anger management issues. They would interview Charlotte's former colleagues and friends to document the changes in her behavior and social connections after her marriage. Most importantly, they would work with Detective Santos to try to locate Monica Stevens and any other women who might have experienced Rick's controlling behavior. As they prepared to leave, Jake handed Charlotte a card. This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a forensic psychologist who specializes in domestic violence cases. Rick's team is going to request psychological evaluations. We need to make sure you're evaluated by someone who understands the impact of abuse on victims. Charlotte looked at the card, then at her mother, then at Jake. One more question. Do you think we can win? Jake smiled for the first time since they'd arrived. Charlotte, I think Rick has no idea what he's up against. He's used to controlling the narrative, controlling you, controlling the situation. But in my courtroom, with a judge who's seen it all, his money and charm don't automatically win the day. Justice isn't guaranteed, but it's possible, and that's worth fighting for. As they walked back to Grace's car, Charlotte felt her daughter kick hard against her ribs. What do you think, sweetheart? She murmured to her belly, ready to show Daddy that his girls are stronger than he thought. The answering kick felt like agreement. Charlotte discovered the frozen bank accounts when she tried to buy groceries. Standing in the checkout line at the supermarket with her mother, watching other customers go about their ordinary Tuesday morning shopping, Charlotte swiped her debit card for $17 worth of prenatal vitamins and fresh fruit. The transaction was declined. She tried again, thinking it might be a technical error. Declined. I'm sorry, the teenage cashier said, looking embarrassed. Do you have another card? Charlotte pulled out her credit card, the one she'd used for 5 years without ever thinking about limits or approval. Declined. The woman behind them in line sighed audibly. Charlotte felt her face burning as she stepped aside to let others pass. her mother quickly paying for the groceries with cash. Outside in the parking lot, Charlotte called the bank from her cell phone, her hands shaking as she navigated the automated system. Mrs. Hartwell, the customer service representative said after Charlotte provided her identification information, your accounts have been frozen at the request of the primary account holder, pending resolution of legal proceedings. The primary account holder? Richard Hartwell. These are joint accounts, but he holds primary authorization. Charlotte sank onto a bench outside the store, feeling like she couldn't breathe. What does that mean exactly? It means you have no access to funds in any accounts bearing your name until the freeze is lifted by court order or by mutual agreement of both parties. But I need money for food, for medical appointments, for basic survival. I understand your situation, ma'am, but I can't override the freeze. You'll need to resolve this through the legal system. Charlotte hung up and immediately called Jake Morrison. He froze everything, she told him as soon as he answered. All our accounts, my credit cards, everything. Jake's sigh was audible even over the phone. I was afraid of this. It's another control tactic, and unfortunately, it's legal since he's the primary account holder. How is that legal? It's my money too. Technically, since you haven't been employed during the marriage, Rick can claim the accounts contain only his earnings. We can fight it, but getting a court order takes time. Charlotte watched other shoppers loading groceries into their cars, going about normal lives where they could buy food and pay bills without requiring court approval. How much time? A week, maybe 2 if Rick's lawyers file objections. Jake, I'm 7.5 months pregnant. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow that I can't pay for. Can your mother help temporarily? Charlotte looked at Grace, who was loading their small bag of groceries into her modest sedan. Her mother was a retired teacher living on Social Security and a small pension. She'd offered to help however she could, but Charlotte knew her resources were limited. Some. But Jake, this is exactly what Rick wanted. He's making me desperate, making me dependent on charity from family and strangers. Charlotte, are you still at the shelter? Yes, but only for another week. After that, I need to find somewhere else to go. Come to my office this afternoon. We're going to file an emergency motion for temporary spousal support and access to marital funds. This kind of financial abuse is exactly what family courts are designed to prevent. After hanging up, Charlotte sat on the bench feeling overwhelmed by the practical realities of leaving Rick. She'd known he controlled their finances, but she'd never fully understood what that meant until now. Grace sat beside her. Charlie, what did the lawyer say? He can fight it, but it'll take time. Mom, I feel so stupid. How did I let myself become so dependent on him? You didn't let anything happen, Grace said firmly. Rick systematically isolated you from your income, your friends, your family, and your independence. That wasn't carelessness on your part. It was calculated abuse on his. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. This is Patricia from Rick's office. I wanted to let you know that your car has been reported stolen. The police may contact you about returning it. Charlotte stared at the message. He reported my car stolen. Grace read over her shoulder. Can he do that? If it's registered in his name, probably. Charlotte felt fresh waves of humiliation washing over her. Mom, I don't even own my own car. I've been living in a fantasy where I thought I was an equal partner in a marriage, but I was really just a very expensive employee he could fire at will. Her phone rang. It was Detective Santos. Charlotte, I wanted to give you a heads up. We've been contacted by Rick's attorney claiming you violated the protective order by taking property that doesn't belong to you. You mean the car? The car, some jewelry, clothing purchased with his credit cards. It's harassment, pure and simple, but you should be prepared for them to push every technicality. Charlotte looked down at her wedding ring, a 3-carat diamond that had cost more than most people's annual salary. She'd never thought to ask whose name was on the receipt. Detective Santos, am I in legal trouble? Not from our perspective. You're entitled to your personal belongings and reasonable transportation. But Charlotte, Rick's lawyers are going to make your life as difficult as possible. They want you to give up and take whatever settlement he offers. After the call ended, Charlotte and Grace drove to Jake's office in Grace's car, leaving Charlotte's luxury SUV in the shelter parking lot to avoid any complications with the theft claim. Jake was waiting with Sarah Chen and a stack of legal documents. We're filing 3 motions today, Jake announced. Emergency spousal support, access to marital funds for basic living expenses, and a contempt citation against Rick for financial abuse. Sarah added, we're also requesting an expedited hearing. Cutting off a pregnant woman's access to food and medical care is exactly the kind of behavior that judges take seriously. How long before I can access money? Charlotte asked. If we get lucky with the docket, maybe by Friday. If Rick's lawyers object and request their own hearing, it could be 2 weeks. Charlotte thought about her dwindling cash, the expired food stamps she was too proud to use, the medical bills that would start arriving soon. There's something else, Jake said, sliding a document across the desk. Rick's team filed a motion requesting immediate DNA testing after the baby is born. DNA testing? He's questioning whether it's his child? It's another intimidation tactic. He knows the baby is his. You've been married 5 years and haven't been anywhere without his tracking apps knowing about it. But questioning paternity is a way to suggest you're promiscuous or dishonest. Charlotte felt sick. How can he do that? How can he try to destroy me and then question whether he's the father of my child? Sarah leaned forward. Charlotte, this is what we warned you about. Rick is going to use every legal mechanism available to break you down psychologically. The goal is to make you so exhausted and humiliated that you'll accept any settlement just to make it stop. But we're not going to let that happen, Jake added. Every one of these frivolous motions makes him look more controlling and vindictive to the judge. He's building our case for us. Charlotte's phone buzzed with another message, this time from Hannah Walsh. Charlie, I heard what's happening through the professional grapevine. I have some vacation time saved up. Can I help? Can I visit? Can I do anything? Charlotte showed the message to the lawyers. Actually, yes, Sarah said. We need character witnesses, people who can testify about your competence and stability before Rick's control escalated. Your former co-workers could be crucial. Charlotte typed back to Hannah. Yes, please, I need all the friends I can get right now. Hannah's response was immediate. On my way, we're going to fight this together. As Charlotte left Jake's office, she realized that Rick's escalating attacks were having an unintended consequence. Instead of isolating her further, his obvious cruelty was motivating people to stand up for her. Hannah was coming. Her mother was here. Jake and Sarah were fighting for her. Rick had money and power and a carefully constructed public image. But Charlotte was discovering something he'd tried to destroy and failed. A network of people who believed she deserved better and were willing to fight alongside her to prove it. Standing outside the law office, feeling her daughter's strong movements inside her, Charlotte made a decision. Rick wanted to make this ugly in public. Fine. Let him. She was ready to show the world who he really was behind his charming facade. The war he'd started was about to become a battle he couldn't control. The support group met every Thursday evening in the basement of St. Mark's Episcopal Church, a circle of folding chairs arranged under fluorescent lights that flickered occasionally. Detective Santos had given Charlotte the address, suggesting she might find it helpful to talk to other women who'd experienced similar situations. Charlotte almost didn't go. She'd spent the week dealing with lawyers and frozen bank accounts and the humiliation of having her credit cards declined in public. The idea of sitting in a circle and sharing her problems with strangers felt overwhelming. But Hannah had driven down from Indianapolis that afternoon, and she'd insisted they go together. You need to see that you're not alone in this, Hannah said as they parked outside the church. And honestly, Charlie, I need to see it too. I've been beating myself up for months wondering if I should have said something when I noticed how much you changed after marrying Rick. The church basement smelled like coffee and old carpet. About 15 women sat in the circle, ranging in age from early 20s to mid-60s. Some held children in their laps. Others sat alone, arms wrapped around themselves like armor. The facilitator was a woman named Rebecca Martinez, not Charlotte's former therapist, but someone who shared her name and a similar approach of gentle questions and patient listening. Tonight we have 2 newcomers, Rebecca said as Charlotte and Hannah found seats. Charlotte and Hannah, would you like to introduce yourselves, or would you prefer to just listen tonight? Charlotte started to say she'd just listen, but then she looked around the circle and saw herself reflected in too many faces. The careful makeup that didn't quite hide exhaustion, the expensive clothes that seemed to sit wrong on women who looked diminished inside them, the hyper-vigilance of people who learn to read danger in every social interaction. "I'm Charlotte," she said quietly. "I left my husband 6 days ago after he assaulted me while I was pregnant. I'm here because I'm trying to figure out how to rebuild my life from nothing." "I'm Hannah," her friend added. "I'm here because I love Charlotte, and I'm trying to understand how I missed the signs that she was in an abusive marriage." Rebecca nodded. "Both of those are valid reasons to be here. Charlotte, when you say rebuild from nothing, what does that mean to you?" Charlotte touched her belly unconsciously. "It means I'm 31 weeks pregnant. I haven't worked in 3 years. I have no access to money, no car, nowhere to live after next week, and no idea how to be a single mother. My husband controlled everything. Our finances, my daily schedule, my social connections, even my medical care. I'm starting over completely." A woman across the circle named Janet raised her hand. "How long were you married?" 5 years, but the control started slowly. Looking back, I can see it was happening from the beginning, but it was so gradual I didn't notice until I was completely isolated." "That's how it works," said another woman, Linda, who looked to be in her 50s. "My ex-husband spent 20 years convincing me I was incompetent. I believed I couldn't balance a checkbook, couldn't make decisions, couldn't survive without him. Turns out I'm actually pretty good at all those things." "How long have you been out?" Charlotte asked. 2 years. Best 2 years of my life, even though the first 6 months were terrifying." Rebecca guided the conversation as women shared their stories. Charlotte heard variations of her own experience: the gradual erosion of independence, the financial control, the isolation from friends and family, the way abuse escalated so slowly that victims blamed themselves for not recognizing it sooner. "I keep thinking I should have known," Charlotte said during her turn to share. "I'm an intelligent woman. I had a successful career. How did I let myself become so dependent on someone who was systematically destroying me?" "Because that was his full-time job," said Maria, a woman about Charlotte's age holding a sleeping toddler. "My therapist told me something that changed everything. She said, 'You were trying to be a good wife while he was trying to be a good abuser. You both succeeded. It's not your fault that you trusted someone you loved.'" After the official meeting ended, several women approached Charlotte privately. "I testified in Linda's divorce case," said Janet, "and she testified in mine. When abusers have similar patterns of behavior, our testimonies support each other." "Would you be willing to testify about Rick if we needed you?" Hannah asked. "If it would help, yes. But more than that, we have resources. Linda's ex-husband was also a wealthy businessman who tried to destroy her financially during their divorce. She learned a lot about protecting yourself legally." Linda joined their conversation. "Charlotte, has your lawyer filed for discovery on Rick's assets?" "I think so. There's so much legal terminology, I'm not always sure what's happening." "Make sure they look for hidden accounts, offshore investments, assets transferred to family members. Men like our exes don't keep all their money where lawyers can easily find it. They also don't usually limit their controlling behavior to just one relationship," added another woman, Patricia. "Have you tried to contact any of his ex-girlfriends?" Charlotte nodded. "My lawyer's trying to find Monica Stevens, the woman he dated before me, but we don't know if she'll be willing to talk." Patricia smiled grimly. "She'll talk. Trust me, she's been waiting years for someone to ask the right questions." As the group dispersed, Rebecca approached Charlotte with a business card. "This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the forensic psychologist your lawyer probably mentioned. She also runs a workshop for women going through high-conflict divorces. It's designed to help you understand the legal process and protect yourself emotionally during litigation." Charlotte took the card gratefully. "Is it expensive?" "It's free for domestic violence survivors, funded by grants and donations from women who've been where you are." Driving home in Hannah's car, Charlotte felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. Not naive optimism, but realistic hope based on seeing other women who'd survived similar situations. "Hannah, can I ask you something?" "Anything." "When did you first realize something was wrong with my marriage?" Hannah was quiet for several minutes. "Remember the Christmas party at Davidson 3 years ago? You and Rick came together, but every time someone tried to talk to you, Rick would interrupt or steer the conversation back to his business deals." Charlotte remembered that party. She'd been excited to see her former colleagues. But Rick had monopolized every conversation, talking about artificial intelligence and startup funding, while Charlotte stood beside him like an accessory. I thought he was just nervous about meeting my work friends. Maybe at first, but then I watched him guide you away from conversations, physically positioning himself between you and other people. When Sarah from accounting asked if you missed working, Rick answered for you. He said you were much happier focusing on your marriage and preparing for the family you'd start soon. Charlotte felt a chill. I remember being embarrassed by that. We weren't even trying to get pregnant yet. That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. But Charlie, I didn't know how to bring it up without seeming like I was attacking your husband. I was afraid you'd choose him over our friendship. I probably would have, back then. The important thing is that you're choosing differently now. And you're not alone. I'm going to stay in town until after the baby's born. I've already talked to my boss about remote work. Charlotte felt tears burning her eyes. Hannah, you can't put your life on hold for me. I'm not putting my life on hold. I'm prioritizing what matters. You're my oldest friend, and you're about to become a single mother while fighting a legal battle against a man with unlimited resources. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. That night at the shelter, Charlotte lay in her narrow bed thinking about the women in the support group. Linda, who'd survived 20 years of psychological abuse and now ran her own bookkeeping business. Janet, who'd left with 3 children and no money and was now studying to become a paralegal. Maria, who'd finished her nursing degree while raising her daughter alone. They'd all rebuilt their lives from nothing. They'd all discovered strength they didn't know they possessed. They'd all chosen freedom over security, truth over comfort. Her daughter kicked hard against her ribs as if responding to Charlotte's thoughts. You're going to be born into a complicated situation, sweetheart, Charlotte whispered to her belly. But you're also going to be born to a mother who finally knows her own worth. That's worth fighting for. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Charlotte, this is Monica Stevens. Detective Santos contacted me about Rick. I've been waiting for this call for 6 years. Can we talk? Charlotte sat up in bed, her heart racing. Monica, Rick's ex-girlfriend, the missing piece of their case against him. She typed back immediately. Yes, thank you for being brave enough to reach out. The response came quickly. You're the brave one. Rick destroyed my life for 2 years, but I was too ashamed to report it. What you did, calling 911 while it was happening, that took incredible courage. Charlotte stared at the message, realizing that her split-second decision to dial for help hadn't just saved herself and her daughter. It might finally give other women the justice they'd been denied. Rick's war against her was about to become something he hadn't anticipated. A reckoning with his past that would reveal patterns he'd spent years hiding. The deposition room felt like a battlefield. Rick sat across from Charlotte at a polished conference table, flanked by 3 lawyers whose combined hourly rates exceeded most people's annual salaries. He wore his most expensive suit, his hair perfectly styled, his expression calibrated to project injured innocence and controlled concern. Charlotte barely recognized him. This wasn't the man who'd grabbed her by the hair in their kitchen 2 months ago. This was the public Rick, the tech mogul who gave keynote speeches about innovation and the future of artificial intelligence. The charm was dialed up to maximum wattage, designed to make her look unstable by comparison. But Charlotte had something Rick didn't expect: documentation. Over the past 6 weeks, with Grace's help, she'd reconstructed the timeline of her isolation. Hannah had provided emails showing how Rick gradually convinced Charlotte to decline social invitations. Dr. Martinez had testified about Charlotte's situational anxiety and its correlation with Rick's controlling behavior. Most damaging of all, Monica Stevens had agreed to testify. Jake Morrison sat beside Charlotte, calm and prepared. Across the table, Rick's lead attorney, David Blackstone, shuffled through papers with theatrical efficiency. Mrs. Hartwell, Blackstone began, you've made some very serious accusations against my client. Let's start with the night of the alleged assault. Had you been drinking that evening? No, I'm 7 months pregnant. Had you taken any medications? Prescription drugs for anxiety, perhaps? Charlotte glanced at Jake, who nodded slightly. I take a prenatal vitamin and a low-dose iron supplement for anemia. That's all. But you have been receiving psychiatric treatment for anxiety and depression, haven't you? I was seeing Dr. Martinez for anxiety, yes. She determined it was situational rather than clinical. Blackstone made a note. Situational anxiety. Related to your pregnancy? Related to my marriage. Rick's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but Charlotte caught it. The mask was starting to slip. Mrs. Hartwell, isn't it true that you called Dr. Martinez's office multiple times expressing paranoid concerns about your husband monitoring your activities? Jake leaned forward. Objection to the characterization of documented surveillance as paranoid concerns. Sustained, said the court reporter, though this wasn't technically a courtroom proceeding. Blackstone had overreached, and everyone knew it. Let me rephrase. Mrs. Hartwell, you expressed concerns about Mr. Hartwell tracking your location? Yes, because he was tracking my location. He installed GPS monitoring apps on my phone without my knowledge. Charlotte watched Rick's face carefully as Jake presented the phone records they'd subpoenaed. Rick had accessed her location data an average of 15 times per day for the past 2 years. The parking lot of her obstetrician's office, the grocery store, the library where she'd started volunteering before Rick convinced her it was too stressful. Mr. Hartwell, Jake said, addressing Rick directly, can you explain why you felt it necessary to check your wife's location 15 times per day? Rick's charm faltered for just a moment. Charlotte has always been somewhat scattered. I worried about her safety, especially during the pregnancy. Were you concerned she might be lying to you about where she was going? Of course not. It was purely about safety. Jake slid another document across the table. These are phone records showing text message frequency between you and Mrs. Hartwell. On average, you sent her 23 text messages per day, demanding to know her activities, who she was with, when she'd be home. Does that seem like normal spousal concern to you? Blackstone objected, but the damage was visible on Rick's face. He was losing control of the narrative. Mrs. Hartwell, Blackstone continued, let's discuss your employment history. You voluntarily left your job 3 years ago, correct? I left because Rick convinced me it would be better for our marriage. No one forced you to quit? Charlotte thought carefully about how to answer. Rick made it clear that my continued employment was incompatible with his vision of our relationship. He said a wife's primary responsibility was supporting her husband's career. And he supported you financially throughout your marriage. He controlled me financially. I had no access to bank accounts, credit cards, or investment information. I received an allowance for household expenses. An allowance of how much? Charlotte felt her face burn. $300 per month. The number hung in the air like an accusation. Rick, worth $12 million, had given his wife the equivalent of minimum wage for groceries and personal expenses. Did you consider this arrangement unfair? Blackstone asked. I considered it demeaning, but Rick said it was temporary until we had children and I could focus on being a mother. And now you're pregnant. Wasn't this the life you planned together? Charlotte placed her hands on her belly, feeling her daughter's strong kicks. I planned to raise children in a loving home, not a house where I was afraid of my husband's anger. Mrs. Hartwell, on the night in question, you claim my client grabbed you by the hair. Can you describe the force used? Charlotte touched her scalp unconsciously. Hard enough to pull hair loose from my scalp. Hard enough to bring tears to my eyes. But no permanent injury occurred? The bruising lasted 2 weeks. And this single incident led you to call police and file for divorce? Charlotte looked directly at Rick as she answered. This single incident of physical violence followed years of emotional and financial abuse. I called police because I was afraid for my baby's safety. Rick's control finally cracked. That's ridiculous, he snapped. I would never hurt my child, Jake pounced. But you would hurt your child's mother while she was carrying your child? I didn't hurt anyone. Charlotte was hysterical, and I was trying to calm her down. By grabbing her hair? By preventing her from having a complete breakdown that could have endangered the baby. Charlotte watched Rick dig his own grave with every word. He was revealing exactly what Jake had predicted, his absolute belief that controlling her was his right even now. Mr. Hartwell, Jake continued, how would you describe your approach to managing household finances? I handle our investments and major expenses. Charlotte manages day-to-day household needs. With a $300 monthly allowance? With a reasonable household budget. Jake presented bank statements showing Rick's personal spending, $5,000 per month on restaurants and entertainment, $10,000 on his luxury car lease, $1,500 on personal training and massage therapy. Your personal spa treatments cost more per month than your wife's entire household allowance? Rick's facade was crumbling visibly now. Charlotte doesn't understand investment strategy or financial planning. I protected our assets. From your wife. From poor financial decisions? Mr. Hartwell, when did you install tracking software on Mrs. Hartwell's phone? I don't recall the specific date. Was it before or after she expressed interest in returning to work part-time? Rick hesitated too long. I'm not sure there's a connection. The installation date was March 15th of last year. Mrs. Hartwell had a job interview at Cameron Marketing on March 10th. Coincidence? Charlotte remembered that interview. She'd been excited about the possibility of returning to work, using her skills again, having her own income. Rick had been supportive until the actual interview, then suddenly concerned about the stress affecting her fertility treatments. I wanted to know if she was safe driving to job interviews, Rick said weakly. Is that why you also monitored her text messages and email? The deposition continued for 4 hours. Rick's lawyers objected repeatedly, but Jake had done his homework. Every controlling behavior was documented. Every financial restriction was quantified. Every isolation tactic was exposed. The final blow came when Jake introduced testimony from Monica Stevens. Mr. Hartwell, are you familiar with Monica Stevens? Rick's face went white. We dated briefly several years ago. For 2 years, according to Miss Stevens' testimony, she describes a pattern of behavior remarkably similar to what Mrs. Hartwell experienced. Financial control, location tracking, isolation from friends and family. The relationship ended when you threw her car keys at her face during an argument. That's a lie. Ms. Stevens has photos of the bruising and medical records from her emergency room visit that night. Rick's lawyers were conferring frantically, clearly unprepared for this revelation. Mr. Hartwell, how many other women have you subjected to this pattern of control and violence? I've never been violent with anyone. Except for grabbing your pregnant wife by the hair? I was trying to help her. Charlotte realized Rick genuinely believed his own narrative. In his mind, controlling her was helping her. Monitoring her was protecting her. Isolating her was improving their relationship. Mr. Hartwell, Jake said quietly, do you believe Mrs. Hartwell has the right to make decisions about her own life? Rick looked confused by the question. Of course. Then why did you require her permission to leave the house? Why did you control her access to money? Why did you monitor her every movement? Someone had to manage the household. Someone had to make responsible decisions. And Mrs. Hartwell wasn't capable of being responsible. Charlotte held her breath as Rick considered his answer. This was the moment Jake had been building toward, getting Rick to admit his fundamental belief that Charlotte was incompetent to manage her own life. Charlotte is intelligent, Rick said slowly, but she's not practical. She's emotional, impulsive. She needed guidance. From you, from someone who understood the bigger picture. And if she disagreed with your guidance? Rick's expression hardened. Then she was wrong. The room fell silent. Rick had just confessed. He saw controlling Charlotte as his right, even his responsibility, because he believed she was incapable of making good decisions without his oversight. Jake gathered his documents. No further questions. As they left the deposition, Charlotte felt lighter than she had in months. Rick's mask had finally slipped completely, revealing the man she'd been married to. Someone who genuinely believed his wife was his property to manage. How do you think we did? Charlotte asked Jake as they reached the parking garage. Jake smiled. Charlotte, Rick just spent 4 hours explaining to a court reporter why he had the right to control every aspect of your life. His own lawyers looked sick by the end. I think we did very well indeed. Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text from Hannah. Monica called me. She says 3 more women have reached out after hearing about the case. Rick's pattern goes back over a decade. Charlotte showed the message to Jake, who whistled low. Rick just went from defending one domestic violence case to potentially facing testimony from multiple victims. His reputation, his business relationships, his entire public image. It's all about to unravel. As Charlotte drove to the shelter with her mother, she felt her daughter kicking strongly inside her. "You hear that, sweetheart?" she said to her belly. "Your daddy just proved in a legal deposition that he thinks women are too stupid to make their own decisions. But your mama's about to show him exactly how wrong he is." 3 months later, Charlotte Bennett, she'd reclaimed her maiden name, signed the final divorce papers in Judge Patricia Andrews' chambers. The settlement was more than fair. It was justice. Rick had agreed to terms that would have been unthinkable 8 months earlier. Charlotte received $4 million in assets, full custody of their daughter with Rick limited to supervised visitation, and monthly child support that would ensure their daughter never wanted for anything. More importantly, the case had become public when local news picked up the story of the tech mogul, whose pattern of abuse stretched back over a decade. 4 women had ultimately testified against Rick, painting a picture of systematic manipulation that destroyed his carefully crafted public image. "How does it feel?" Grace asked as they walked out of the courthouse, Charlotte carrying 2-month-old Emma Grace Bennett in her arms. Charlotte paused on the courthouse steps, breathing freely for the first time in years. Emma was perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and her mother's determined spirit, if her strong grip was any indication. Scary, Charlotte admitted. Exciting, real. The fear was manageable now. Not the constant terror of living with Rick, but the healthy nervousness of someone starting over. She'd found a townhouse in a good school district, nothing like Rick's mansion, but entirely hers. She'd enrolled in classes to update her marketing skills. Most importantly, she'd discovered that the woman Rick had spent years convincing was helpless was actually quite capable. Hannah was waiting by the car with surprising news. "Charlotte, you're not going to believe this. Cameron Marketing called. They want you back. With a promotion and flexible hours for new mothers. Apparently, your reputation in the industry is still solid." Charlotte shifted Emma to her other arm, feeling a flutter of excitement she hadn't experienced in years. "Really? They said they'd been hoping you'd return to work someday. When they heard about the divorce, they reached out to Hannah to see if you might be interested in freelance consulting while Emma's little." Charlotte looked down at her daughter, who was regarding the world with serious dark eyes that looked remarkably like her mother's. "What do you think, sweetheart? Ready to have a working mom?" Emma's response was to grab Charlotte's finger with surprising strength and refuse to let go. The apartment Charlotte had chosen was small compared to Rick's mansion, but every corner belonged to her. As she painted Emma's nursery in soft yellows and greens, colors she'd chosen herself, without consulting anyone, she thought about the woman who'd made that 911 call 9 months ago. She'd been terrified that night, afraid of Rick's anger and uncertain about the future. But she'd also been brave in a way she was only beginning to understand. She'd chosen her daughter's safety over her own security, truth over comfort, freedom over the familiar prison of Rick's control. The nursery was nearly finished when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mrs. Bennett, my name is Sarah Martinez. I saw your story in the news. My husband has been isolating me from my family and controlling our finances for 3 years. I'm pregnant and scared to leave, but seeing your courage has given me hope. Can you help me find resources?" Charlotte stared at the message, remembering her first night at the women's shelter, the support group meetings that had shown her she wasn't alone, the other women who testified against Rick despite their own pain. She set down her paintbrush and typed back, "Sarah, you're braver than you know for reaching out. Yes, I can help. You're not alone in this." Over the next hour, Charlotte connected Sarah with Detective Santos, with the women's shelter, with Sarah Chen's legal advocacy group. She shared resource lists and phone numbers, but more than that, she shared hope. "The hardest part is making the decision to leave," Charlotte told her over the phone as Emma slept peacefully in her crib. "But once you do, you'll discover strength you didn't know you had, and you'll discover that there are people ready to help you rebuild your life." After the call ended, Charlotte walked to Emma's crib and looked down at her sleeping daughter. Emma had been born into a world without Rick's control, without the constant tension that had filled their house. She would grow up watching her mother make decisions, manage finances, pursue goals, and build relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. "You know what, baby girl?" Charlotte whispered. "I think we're going to be just fine." Emma stirred slightly, as if responding to her mother's voice, then settled back into peaceful sleep. Charlotte's phone buzzed with another message, this one from Monica Stevens. "Charlotte, I started a support group for Rick's other victims. We meet monthly, and we're working with domestic violence organizations to help other women recognize the warning signs. Would you be interested in joining us? Charlotte smiled, remembering the support group meetings that had helped her understand she wasn't alone. The circle was expanding, women helping women, survivors becoming advocates. She typed back, "Yes, count me in." As Charlotte finished painting the nursery, she realized that Rick's attempt to destroy her had actually revealed something he'd spent years trying to hide: her own strength. He'd isolated her from friends, and she'd rebuilt those relationships stronger than before. He'd cut off her access to money, and she'd discovered her own earning potential. He tried to convince her she was nothing without him, and she'd proven that she was everything she needed to be. The townhouse was quiet except for the soft sounds of Emma sleeping and the distant hum of traffic. It was peaceful in a way Rick's mansion had never been, filled with love rather than fear. Charlotte's phone rang one final time. It was Jake Morrison with news about Rick's business. Three of his major investors pulled out after the trial, Jake reported. His company stock has dropped 60%, and there are rumors of a federal investigation into his business practices. Apparently, the pattern of control extended beyond his personal relationships. Charlotte felt a mixture of sadness and satisfaction. She'd never wanted to destroy Rick's life, but she'd needed to protect her own. Sometimes those two things were inseparable. "Jake, do you think he'll ever understand what he did wrong?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "I think Rick genuinely believes he was helping you, protecting you, managing your life for your own good. Men like him rarely develop the self-awareness to recognize their behavior as abusive." What about supervised visitation with Emma? The court-appointed supervisor says Rick spends most visits talking about his business deals and legal troubles rather than interacting with Emma. She's too young to understand now, but eventually she'll recognize the difference between someone who loves her and someone who sees her as a possession. After hanging up, Charlotte checked on Emma one more time, then settled into the rocking chair she'd bought with her own money, earned from her own work, chosen according to her own preferences. She pulled out her laptop and began working on a presentation for Cameron Marketing. Ideas for a campaign targeting professional women returning to work after having children. It felt good to use her brain again, to solve problems and create strategies, and remember how competent she was at things Rick had convinced her she couldn't handle. As she worked, Charlotte thought about all the women who'd reached out since her story became public. Women in marriages like hers, women afraid to leave, women just beginning to recognize that their partner's love looks suspiciously like control. She was no longer just Charlotte Bennett, single mother rebuilding her life. She was Charlotte Bennett, survivor and advocate, living proof that it was possible to escape even the most carefully constructed prison. Her daughter kicked in her sleep, making small sounds of contentment that filled Charlotte's heart. Emma would grow up knowing that her mother had chosen courage over comfort, truth over security, freedom over fear. That was the best inheritance Charlotte could give her, the knowledge that women were strong enough to save themselves and generous enough to help save each other. Outside, the sun was setting over their small city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Charlotte closed her laptop, picked up her sleeping daughter, and stood by the window watching the world wake up to tomorrow. "Ready for whatever comes next, sweetheart?" she whispered to Emma. The baby stirred and opened her eyes, looking directly at her mother with an expression that seemed to say, "With you, I'm ready for anything." Charlotte smiled, kissing Emma's forehead gently. They'd built something beautiful from the ashes of Rick's control, a life based on love rather than fear, choices rather than commands, hope rather than despair. It was exactly the beginning they both deserved. Epilogue. 1 year later, Charlotte stood at the podium of the annual Conference for Domestic Violence Advocates, looking out at an audience of social workers, attorneys, law enforcement officers, and survivors. Emma sat quietly in her stroller nearby, now a toddler with Charlotte's determined expression and an independent spirit that made her mother proud. "When I called 911 that night," Charlotte began, "I thought I was just protecting my unborn daughter from one moment of violence. I had no idea I was actually protecting both of us from a lifetime of diminishing ourselves to manage someone else's need for control." The audience was quiet, attentive. In the front row, Detective Santos nodded encouragingly. "The hardest part wasn't leaving Rick," Charlotte continued. The hardest part was rebuilding my belief in my own judgment. When someone spends years convincing you that your perceptions are wrong, your emotions are excessive, your decisions are flawed, it takes time to trust yourself again. She looked down at Emma, who was quietly examining a board book about strong women throughout history, a gift from Grace, who'd become the grandmother she'd always dreamed of being. But here's what I learned. The strength you need to leave is the same strength you need to rebuild. The courage required for that first phone call is the same courage that helps you start over. The voice that says, "This isn't right," is the same voice that will guide you toward what is right. After her presentation, women approached with stories, questions, and gratitude. A young teacher who'd left her controlling boyfriend after hearing Charlotte's story. A grandmother who'd helped her daughter escape a marriage similar to Charlotte's. A police officer who'd started asking different questions during domestic violence calls. Monica Stevens was there too, now running a nonprofit organization for survivors of financial abuse. "Charlotte, we've helped over 200 women in the past year," she reported, "and it all started with your decision to call for help while it was happening instead of waiting until it was too late." As Charlotte packed up her materials, she reflected on how much had changed. Her work with Cameron Marketing had expanded into a full-time position with benefits and flexibility for single mothers. Emma was thriving in daycare, already showing signs of the independence and confidence Charlotte hoped to nurture. Rick's supervised visits had dwindled to monthly, then quarterly, then stopped altogether when he moved to another state to rebuild his career away from the reputation he'd destroyed. Emma didn't ask about her father yet, but when she did, Charlotte would tell her the truth, that some people love by controlling and some people love by supporting freedom, and it was important to know the difference. The support group Charlotte had joined now met in her living room twice a month. Women at various stages of leaving, healing, and rebuilding gathered to share resources and strength. Last week, they'd celebrated Janet's graduation from paralegal school and Maria's promotion to head nurse. "The most important thing I can tell other women," Charlotte had said during that meeting, "is that leaving isn't the end of your story. It's the beginning of the story you get to write yourself." Now, driving home from the conference with Emma babbling happily in her car seat, Charlotte felt the deep satisfaction of a life reclaimed and purpose found. Her phone showed several missed calls from women who'd heard her speak and wanted help finding resources in their own communities. She'd call them back after Emma's bedtime, offering hope and practical guidance and the reminder that they were stronger than they knew. At home, Charlotte fed Emma dinner while reviewing job applications from women seeking positions at companies that offered domestic violence survivors a fresh start. It was work that felt meaningful in ways her old career never had, using her skills not just to sell products, but to rebuild lives. As she tucked Emma into her crib that night, Charlotte thought about all the women who were sitting in the situations like hers had been, isolated, controlled, afraid to leave because they couldn't imagine surviving on their own. "Sweet dreams, baby girl," she whispered to Emma. "Tomorrow we're going to keep showing the world that women can save themselves and each other." Emma reached up and grabbed Charlotte's finger with that familiar strength, holding on tight as she drifted off to sleep. Charlotte smiled, remembering the night she'd first felt that grip, in the hospital delivery room, when Emma had arrived healthy and strong despite everything they'd been through together. Even as a newborn, Emma had seemed to understand that they were a team, that they would face whatever came next together. Now, watching her daughter sleep peacefully in the home they'd built together, Charlotte knew that Rick's attempt to break her had actually revealed her unbreakable core. He'd tried to convince her she was nothing, and instead she discovered she was everything she needed to be. Outside their townhouse, the city settled into evening quiet. Other single mothers were tucking their children into bed. Other survivors were making plans for better tomorrows. Other women were finding the courage to make difficult phone calls and hard choices and life-changing decisions. Charlotte's story was one of thousands, but it was also uniquely hers. Proof that love shouldn't hurt, that strength could be quiet, and that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was refuse to accept less than you deserved. She turned off the nursery light and headed to her own room, where her laptop waited with emails from women seeking help and organizations requesting her advocacy. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to turn her pain into purpose. But tonight, Charlotte Bennett slept peacefully in her own home, in her own bed, making her own choices about her own life, exactly as it should be. The woman who'd once been convinced she was nothing without Rick Hartwell had become someone even better. Herself, fully realized and freely chosen, strong enough to save herself and generous enough to help others do the same. In the end, that was the greatest victory of all.